Hey Todd, how you doing?
Good. Beautiful day in Colorado.
Absolutely, I'm sure it is. It's actually nice here in St. Louis too. So but Jeremy's getting ready to get some rain though, so not as fun for him. At least according to the news here, they said it's really going to be hitting Kentucky hard here coming up, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's pouring. So yeah,
appreciate
that. Yeah.
so
as we're recording this, kudos to all the people who are sitting out in line at Old Forester.
Yes, did you see that? Some people are saying there's more in line already than there will be bottles, which I saw.
It's 48 hours in advance, and people are
this is so crazy.
Hey, it's like we always say, it's one way to go.
Yeah. Yep. So Todd, before we get to the interview itself, we want to ask you about your whiskey and the great company history you've got. It's always important for us, at least for our audience sake, to kind of get to know the individuals on a personal basis. So if you don't mind, focus a little bit on the personal, tell us about yourself, and then we'll get to all business questions after that.
Personal stuff. Well, I have a lovely wife and a 7-year-old daughter who's already smarter than dad. That didn't take very long. She's just wonderful. We've been really lucky. She's got the right amount of awesome kid and the right amount of I'm not going to listen to a thing you say. It's a nice balance. I think.
So she's just like dad.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I don't think I would have done very well if she was a Stepford child. You know, she needs a little of that punk rock in her, and boy, does she have it. So
awesome.
Been in the family business is really kind of consumes my time. But I understand there's lots of laughs and days that can be longer than they really need to be, because I'm already spending time with the people that I love. So it's a little, it's a little bit different in the sense that, very long hours, but not all of it is work related. And, my brother that I'm in business with is an older brother. And I always say on these interviews that the older brother, younger brother dynamic doesn't change no matter how old you get.
Nope.
You'll never catch up, huh?
Nope. And he's an engineer. He's a Stanford trained engineer. So you can imagine how much grief you can wind up getting from somebody who's annoyingly right all the time. It's not a whole lot of fun that the younger brother, even after all these years, doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And, I got over admitting that about, 10, 15 years ago. And it's like, all right, well, you just know what you're talking about and I don't. So let's just leave.
That's called acceptance. Yes.
Yeah.
You're at that stage.
You're at the first step. Very good.
You're there.
But
not only can he say he's smarter than you, he has the paperwork to back it up.
That's right. That's exactly it. My degrees were utterly useless compared to his. And then I went on to, get my diplomas in brewing. So I kind of caught up a little bit, but I'm just
yours are more fun.
And
yours are more fun though.
Well, that's what he tells me, that mine's more fun. But then of course, he's up at the casinos by noon every Friday while I'm here still working.
Again, he goes back to, see, I'm smarter than you.
Yeah, you kind of go back and forth between that, but I love what I do. So I can't complain. I get to make whiskey for the, if I did complain, who the hell would listen, right? So,
Not us. We wouldn't listen.
Yeah. No.
That's right. But we're supposed to go to 40 hours. I was supposed to finally go to 40 hours a week, and then COVID hit, and that kind of restructured everybody's world, I'm sure. But we're finally, well, I hope anyways, by spring on the other end of it. But I'm finally at the point in my career where I can relax and start to hand over more of the control to the crew that we have here, and start working 40-hour work weeks, which is going to feel like I'm mailing it in. Oh God. Yeah. The couple times when I get out of here after 8 hours, it's, it's part of that deal where when you're used to that, you feel like you're cheating or mailing it in. But the wife has put up with enough of this, and it's time to enjoy life a bit. And so the nice thing is we do indeed plan to start traveling a lot more as a family, which I'm excited about. And Louisville and St. Louis and Toronto are 3 places we intend to hit over the next year.
Yeah.
We just get COVID to kind of chill a little bit more.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Ellie's 7 years old and isn't vaccinated yet, and so. Yeah. But that's pretty much it. I am very much a family guy, I guess, is the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, it's having priorities in the right spots.
I think so. It's people talk about work-life balance, but when you're in a family business, the math is a little bit different. My mom comes in on Monday, Wednesdays, and sometimes Friday, and does books, and so.
We'd love to chat with your mom.
Yes,
yeah.
we started a new series where we're chatting with moms. We got to sign your mom up for this.
She would just she's never been on a Zoom call before.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, this is great.
Would be an absolute. I tell you what, I'd love to see. She would say no.
Oh.
She would say no.
Oh,
they
you
don't
gotta
want
talk
to
her
hear from me.
Talk her into it. Talk her
We're
into
talking-
it. We have a series where we
Just drop the
talk to-
laptop in front of her and walk.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
like
We've had other
to hang
moms.
up.
Yeah. They've listened to the other interviews and they're good. They are really, I mean, of course, we treated the moms very well. We were very respectful, and it's
I can
fun.
only admit, I would have no worries about that.
Yeah.
It's just her, telling stories, and
that's what we want.
she can't help herself. We get a kick out of it. Well, it's it's healthy. You cannot get an ego or act
Right. When your mom's there, you can't.
Nobody
she would
will bring you back down to the the beginning like a mother will.
She would not.
Oh, you're 50 paces ahead. I'm going to bring you right back down to the start.
Absolutely. That would not work, for her. And it's good because our nephew just started with us. He's 21 and has a lot to learn. And she just would put up with that crap. So, it's the most important thing to her is how we treat everybody who's working with us, our business partners, the important stuff, right? Yep. She has a tendency she doesn't look at things as ones and zeros. And, you have to make money. You have to keep the lights on. But that's not all it's about. And when your mom's a couple doors down, it's pretty easy to remember that, right?
Yeah, it's hard to raise your voice and get frustrated.
You're talking and you're like, can someone close the door? Because I can't want my mom to hear.
Right. That's one of my favorite things, of course, is watching somebody come around the corner and, you fire out a couple swear words and there's mom and they're, ooh. So it tends to keep things a little bit more respectable around here, which isn't a bad thing, is it? So,
that's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
And she's not there every day of the week, so there's
you got the other side of it.
Reckless.
Right.
If she was here every day of the week, I think we'd probably drive each other a little bit crazy. But she's here. She was an office manager before. We didn't start the business together. Scott and I were up in Ann Arbor, and so when we came back, that's when she got involved and helped with the bookkeeping, and she just makes her feel young, and it's an awful lot of fun working with her and having her around, and getting to see some of the fun things. So today we just mashed 15,000 pounds of peaches, and she's never seen such a thing before. Yeah, and so you kind of get to share. And of course, she still looks at me and she goes, "How the hell do you know how to do all of this?" Right. Like, well, Mom, believe it or not, since I left grammar school, I've picked up a couple things, and it's part of being a parent. I marvel that my daughter knows lyrics back to front to songs at 7. So I think it's part of being a parent that. Of course, that's not abnormal in any stretch of the way. But as a parent, you're like, oh, my God, how do you do that? So.
Yeah, exactly. You've kind of talked about this already a little bit. You're in business with your brother, and we always like to find out people's evolution into the industry. But you kind of started out in the distillation brewing process kind of early on, and it sounds like that's kind of you knew that's kind of where you were going. Yeah. But you started out opening a brewery there in Michigan with your brother Scott. So kind of talk to us about how that evolution started and how you guys got that going.
Sure. And by the way, there's no way this show's going to be 30 minutes long.
That's right.
I'm just warning you.
Well, we have snacks. We've got bathrooms.
No,
Yeah.
I am absolutely fine with it. I'm just warning y'all.
Oh, we're good. We're on your
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Whatever. You want.
Okay. So
It could go yes or no answers from here on out.
no, I'm
Yeah.
perfectly
Steve and I are at the age
comfortable.
now. We have catheters, so we're all good.
Yes.
They're
Not me,
breaking
though.
down the pH equipment and cleaning it up. So I have no interest in that. We're
Oh,
good.
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So my brother went to Northwestern for his undergraduate. It was economics and industrial engineering. And then he went to Stanford for environmental engineering. And he graduated. He got his master's degree in that. And I think that was 93. Yeah, it had to have been 93. And so he's in his 20s and he was working for an environmental firm, largest wastewater treatment environmental firm. They kind of focused on that. Company called Black and Veatch. So for instance, they designed the wastewater treatment plants for the city of LA. So like that kind of engineering, right? The stuff that just it's why we always say around here that he's a howitzer when you need a pea gun, basically. This is low rent compared to what he's used to doing. But he was basically going to Fortune 500 companies and as a consultant. And in his mind, he wanted to try and help them be pollution free. So this is 94. There was no such word as sustainable. Nobody knew what the hell that was. And he wanted to show these companies how to be more efficient and, be better with energy and water and materials and touch things once in a factory setting. Why are you touching it 3 times? Touch it, stuff like that. And he realized very quickly that all they wanted him to do was make them EPA compliant and get the hell out of my plant, you dumb kid. Because he was 93, he was 25 at the time. And he didn't want to do that for the rest of his life. And so he decided that I'm going to go ahead and start up a factory. I'm going to show people how to do a pollution-free factory. So he got his dumb kid brother. I applied to a brewing school called the Siebel Institute of Technology. I just finished up my undergraduate degrees, which were pointless, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I'd always liked beer and not in the, haha sense, but I was one of those dumb kids that when I was 16, I was drinking Guinness. So I just like different flavors. Don't ask me why. I have no idea, but I just, whatever I could get my hands on, Sam Smith's oatmeal stout, you get the idea. So I was into beer at a younger age than I probably should have been, I guess. And I applied to the Siebel Institute and was accepted. And one of the professors that was there, the visiting lecturer, was the dean of a brewing school in Germany. And what had gotten me really into this idea was a gentleman by the name of Eric Warner. And he wrote a book called Hefeweizen. It was basically on how to make German wheat beer.
Yep.
On the back cover, there's a picture of him in traditional German country clothes, and found out, he's an American, and he went over to Germany to study how to be a brewmaster. And I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I totally want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of got that together with my brother, said, okay, let's make a brewery. And so that's how it started. We went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, because he'd been there a couple times. Northwestern's in the Big Ten. And so they would go to Ann Arbor to get their asses beat by the University of Michigan, and he went to Ann Arbor and really liked it. And they didn't have a brewery. That was as simple as it got. So we're like, okay, fish in the barrel. College town, no brewery. This was 94. So I was 24 at the time that we put the business plan together. And we finally, and then I went to brewing school in the middle, and then took 2 years of temp jobs to find a bank that would give us a bunch of dumb kids money. And we started the brewery in Ann Arbor, and we opened in 2009. And our focus was on, if you want me to keep going, I can get to the distilling part if you'd like.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
we're the closest bar to the big house, so 100 and whatever thousand people. And so as a result, we would just be jam-packed for games. Basically, everybody would go up, try and find tickets. If you can't get tickets, you look for the bar. We're the closest bar. They would come in, and basically the place would be packed from 10 o'clock in the morning until, depending on what time the game actually was, and until 8 at night. And then of course the college kids would come out after that, after resting up. And we had big German style picnic tables. It was one of my favorite parts about Germany, was that people drank together.
Yeah.
I always thought it was weird, or maybe it's because I didn't have a whole lot of money, but I always thought it was weird that people would go out to bars with your crew, don't talk to anybody else, spend way the hell too much, spend 10 times the amount of the beer, and then go home. I'm like, this math doesn't make any sense to me. Why aren't we talking to any? And in Germany, you have to talk to people. And of course, part of it is, when I was in Germany, you can tell I'm an American from about 10 miles away. Well, it didn't help that I had I would always read books in the beer halls. That's where I like to hang out. So people would always come and sit down to, talk about whatever the hell it was. And it seemed to be more than anything. We were always on the verge of invading some country when I was there. And so they'd always have questions as if I have all the answers.
Right.
The
I don't know.
In your head.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I mean, I can tell you where it is on a map, which is better than most, but other than that, but because this was 1999, and I made unfiltered German style lagers, what today would be called Keller beer or country beer.
Yep.
And understand that wasn't exactly the smartest move from every brewery at that time had a pale ale, a porter, a red ale, you can go oatmeal stout, you can go right on. It's basically all the breweries were out of a kit back then, or in my mind it was. So I thought making an unfiltered Schwarz beer, unfiltered Oktoberfest, Helles would be cool, and people would like that they're having something there, and they just didn't get it. And so, I
feel like you should have been in my city, because we have the biggest Bavarian festival outside of Munich. Every October, we call it Oktoberfest, and it's like all Fest Holland. So I think you were just in the wrong location.
You were just a little south.
Oh goodness,
Yeah.
Was it König Ludwig? I'm trying to remember. There was a German brew pub in Toronto that opened in the 90s, and I can't remember the name of it. That was literally owned by the German company, and I'm spacing the name right now, and I can't remember. Was it König? Anyway, I know. I do know what you're talking about. And Canadians and lager. So at the Siebel Institute. At the Siebel Institute in Chicago that I attended, I sat to the left of me was the master brewer for all the plants for Toronto.
Wow.
For Molson, who lived in Toronto at the Manitowoc. I always mispronounce the name, but anyways, one of the breweries that he was in charge of. That's an ice maker I just threw out. Never mind. I'm trying to. And I'm naming ice makers.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I was in here at 6:30 this morning.
Yeah, that's okay. You were making the lagers and brew. And
that weren't cool. And
no,
and I, even if they were, I'm not sure that would have helped much, because of the tables, because the place was huge. You could fit 300 people in there.
Yeah,
we had a whole section of the law school that would come in, for an event and come and hang out. Well, the problem is easily half of the people didn't drink beer. This is 1999. And they'd want to go uptown to have cocktails or wine or whatever the hell it was. And we could only sell what we made. That was the kind of license, the licensing in Michigan.
Okay.
Just crazy.
That's weird.
Yes, it is. But, it turned out, right? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And so the only way we could get around it was to add a still. And I still had some wonderful contacts in Austria and Germany, and went back overseas and made eau de vies. And of course I knew all about grains, with the brewing side, and the both brewing diplomas. Half of the course was in malting and half of it was in brewing. But I hadn't worked with fruit before, and so that's what that was. Went over and worked with everything from cherries to quince to quita to pears, peaches, you name it. We fermented it and turned it into alcohol, and came back, and we were one of the first distillery pubs in the country. We were definitely the first to have beer.
So you make it sound like it was just a beautiful like transition from brewing into distilling, but could you talk to us a little bit about like how you decided you were going to get the still and like that process and to start distilling?
Yeah, I mean, because of course, well, I went to a distilling school seminar, whatever the hell you want to call it, at a place called Alltech.
Okay.
And Alltech at the time, the course is held about 300 people. And I think 5 or 8 of us or something like that were in beverage alcohol. Everybody else was being trained on fuel ethanol plants, which was
really
completely
Wow.
hilarious. Yeah, it was.
That's crazy.
Well, I'm sitting in a seminar with 300 people, and they were talking about the acceptable levels of bacteria in the fermenters. And I come from a brewing background, and I'm like raising my hand going, I think you missed a couple decimal points here. My God, the amount of bacteria and it's like, oh, right, you're turning this into gasoline. Who cares? But it was neat. It was neat to hear that different perspective. I only got, caught a couple of those, and the rest was on the beverage side of things. But fermentation is it for me anyways. I mean, I think my experience with distillers, especially the younger ones that I've come across in the last 10 years or so, 5-10 years, tend to think that the stills are magic and kind of put a focus on what the stills are. To me, the stills are, and it's going to sound particularly strange coming from me, obviously, are close to irrelevant to me compared to what are you putting in them. And so to me, the fermentation and bacterial fermentations and wild fermentations, that to me is my focus. That's what I am interested in.
Connor O'Driscoll from Heaven Hill also says the same thing, that he's a big fermentation nerd.
Yeah. I don't understand how you can not be like that, but of course, that's why we have so many different distilleries. It's cool.
Well, if you think about, like, you just go to take the cooking or the chef example. You can have the best oven in the world, but if you put garbage in, it's going to taste like garbage coming out.
Garbage.
So it's all about what you do with it before you use that final tool. In this case, the tool is the still.
It's the still. Yep, I agree, and it's why we have the ongoing conversation of late. What's better, a pot still or a column still? And to me, it's kind of irrelevant. But it depends on what you're doing beforehand. And so that's where the focus is for us. We're very much heavy on the fermentation side of things. And so to me, when you're asking about the transition from brewing to distilling, I mean, it was like falling out of a boat and hitting water, in the sense that the road to make a Helles is like this. The instant the road to make a bourbon is like this, and the reason is this has to be shelf stable. If you miss the ppm of esters, your ratio of esters to organic acids, if it's out of line for a Helles, you're going to taste it, and it's not going to be a good thing. If we're talking about bourbon, it's almost irrelevant. We're talking relative. Obviously, it's relevant, but relative between the two things, that I always feel like I'm cheating. I'm coming from a background where everything is aseptic, and you're working as hard as you can to showcase the malt, to showcase the hops, to make it as clean as you can, to make sure that yeast is happy. And the adage I always share on tours that dictates how we run the plant entirely is, there's a Bavarian brewing adage for young brewers, and it's that your customers should not be able to tell how strong your beer is until they try and get up from the table.
I like that.
But it's as simple that it's telling you to, make sure your yeast is happy.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not asking it to eat too much at once. Chill your temperatures down. Don't ferment as fast. Ferment slow. Let it work through the substrate. Make sure there's plenty of zinc. Make sure there's plenty of calcium, plenty of free amino nitrogen, yada, yada, yada. and so the transition from, from making beer and lager in particular, in my opinion, is much more difficult than making ales. Making distilled spirits was much, much easier.
Oh, okay.
What's interesting is, and you talked about this early on about your brother and being, obviously we laughed about him being the smart one in the family. But as we talked about this, if I recall correctly, he's got a partial degree in economics, correct?
Correct.
So from a brewery standpoint, you can brew, you can bottle, and you can be selling pretty quick what you make. But when you're distilling, it's an investment, and you're going to sit for a while to finally reap the rewards of what you've produced. So really how smart is he?
You're not kidding. What we've done is not bright. There's no question about it. So we have 3,000 barrels sitting over there, and some of the whiskeys we've made haven't been made in 5 decades. Mm-hmm. What's the market going to look like when we release it? We didn't know. Believe it or not, we missed the call on the pandemic. We didn't see it coming. Yeah. But no, you're absolutely right. What I will say is he was smart enough to be able to make sure we have things we can turn quickly. Mm-hmm. So we make vodka. Mm-hmm. We make gin and several liqueurs, all of which I can have from grain to glass in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
which isn't too bad. Some a little bit longer, but roughly. And we've done a lot of our purchases out of cash. Mm-hmm. So the 3 chambers that we bought that out of cash. And the reason we did that is we didn't want to compound the folly of what we were doing, and it was pretty dumb. No. By taking out a massive loan for it on top of it, so that if you got to the end and the younger brother didn't know what the hell he was talking about or doing, we didn't have a loan staring at us in the face.
Yeah.
So there were, it is really, really nice having somebody who understands, time value of money, and we are very, very conservative financially. We're flaming moderates, or at least that's what my wife calls us. But on the financial side, we're very, very conservative. We're rolling into our 22nd year, and we've always wanted to, and we certainly doubled down on that idea after the Brewers crash that happened about 5 years ago, right? Where the growth was like this, and then there's a ceiling, we can't go anymore. To never get into a situation where we were chasing volume. So we never make enough of anything. We try not to have delusions of grandeur, and we have no interest. A lot of your guests, I'm sure, are looking to break into the big time or sell to another company, and that's totally cool. That's their path. But it's not ours. We're still getting used to the fact that the first of the month isn't gut wrenching, right? Where it's how the hell are we going to keep the lights on?
Yeah.
So as a result of having to go through that for the first decade plus, we're very conservative with what it is we do with our money. So yeah, he proved to be smarter on that count too, unfortunately.
Yeah. So as you make
go
ahead,
Renee.
Sorry.
The smarter one on when it comes to money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hey. It's a running joke that I barely know how to balance a checkbook, but just enough to keep me out of trouble, and
Yeah. So you make the decision to get out of brewing and focus on the distilling, but you're also at the same time you're moving to Colorado. Was that just a matter of going home? Was it a matter of the laws were better in Colorado versus Michigan, or a combination of, or what led to the decision to move to Colorado from
all of the above? So our building was we tried to buy the building several times. If you have a successful business and you're dependent on a location, the first thing you have to do is figure out how the hell to buy the building. Because if you don't, you're going to have to do some improvements or renovations or something, again, going back to Scott and the Econ, it's idiotic to do that. So we were trying to buy the building and we just couldn't get them to, the price that we thought they were asking was ridiculous. It did turn out to be ridiculous, but somebody bought it in 2007. We all know what happened in 2008. And the company that bought the building, I'll never forget. We, of course, it's public record. Many times a property is sold. So we looked it up. It was available online in 2007, believe it or not. And looked up, okay, well, this is how much their payments are. So even if they're looking to just break even, that rent is going to be laughable, which it was. And he's like, well, I guess I'm going to meet with a new owner. And he basically couldn't stop laughing in the meeting with how much that guy thought we were going to pay him. And it was actually funny. We brought a bunch of friends who own multiple brew pubs and other stuff to, try and keep the business going. And they looked at us and said, we can't make the rent work. And I'm like, no, really? So my brother isn't an utter moron. Yeah, they actually ran pieces in the paper where they're getting quotes saying, I don't know why they would leave if business was good. And I'm just like, where did you go to school where you don't understand this? They raised how much they're charging you. The business is no longer sustainable. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, once you're deciding to move, it really doesn't matter where you go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Michigan is state-run system, and it's an incredibly corrupt system. I don't mind saying. I don't understand why other distillers stay there. I really don't. Because all the markups are designed for the wholesalers. A lot of people think that the prices and the markups go to roads, bridges, and schools, which if it was, honestly, we wouldn't have had a problem with that, but that's not where it goes. It goes to the wholesalers. And then after the markup are all the taxes, that goes to roads, which we're fine with. But basically, our gin, to make it easy, our gin shows up on the shelf about $32 and always has. We haven't raised our prices in 21 years. But to make the same amount of money in Michigan, it was going to show up on the shelf, I think, at like $49.
Wow.
And the idea of selling $49 gin in Michigan for what all we knew was a depression. We had no idea, where things were. Colorado allows for self-distribution. So we made the decision to send my assistant out about a half a year early, 8 months, something like that. We got a used storage unit. That was our warehouse that we licensed through the state. And he had a hatchback and drove around and got us on 200 accounts before we moved. So got us on at liquor stores, got us on in bars, so that when we arrived, we still had money coming from there. And then, of course, our two biggest customers at the time was San Francisco and London. So we were selling our spirits there and doing very well. So these were what Lance Winters and I call the dark ages, when we were trying to sell in the early 2000s to anybody. Nobody understood what we were doing. Nobody got it. You make gin, you mean like bathtub gin? I mean, we heard it all. Nobody understood it. In Ann Arbor, we were winning, we'd send it into BTI was kind of an early one. San Francisco, I think their first competition was 02 or something like that. And we didn't even hear about it. I don't think it's a 04 or 05 or something like that. But we started winning gold medals there and doing well with that. But Ann Arbor just didn't get it. We didn't have the money for marketing. And I can tell you that, we had our spirits to go. And we sell more in one single tour here in Denver now in 2020 than we'd sell in 3 months in Ann Arbor.
Wow.
Nobody got it. Nobody in our most popular drinks, vodka tonic, gin and tonic, and vodka and Red Bull, which I grudgingly agreed to.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you know how hard I worked on, but whatever. You got to pay the rent. You got to pay the rent. And that's right. That's what everybody was asking for. Who the hell am I? When you're younger, you try and hold on to I was the guy who made the German Hefeweizen, which was rare to have a German trained brewer here in the States making Hefeweizen at the time. And I was so proud of the yeast strain that I used that had this lovely, when you nailed it, and I didn't nail it every single time, unfortunately, it would have this lovely pear note that I worked so hard. So for me, watching somebody drop a lemon in it just sucked. But after a while, it's like, you know, do you want to eat, Todd? Or
Right.
I was like, if you want to shampoo your dog with the Hefeweizen and knock yourself out, whatever
you want to do.
Whatever the hell you want to do with
It's
it.
My
yours,
dog
yeah.
says my
That's
great
r-
pair, though.
That's right. So that's what got us to move back here. The laws were really wide open. And you know, that came from the brewing side of things. I don't know if you know our well, he's our senator now. It's hard to wrap my head around this. Hickenlooper is his name, but he opened a brew pub, the first brew pub in Denver, and I think first or second in Colorado, can't remember. Was mayor for a very long time, and you know, was involved in politics, and so we have really market freedom that Americans like to talk about, but don't often like to legislate. I've learned in my years, but it just that access to market is everything. And what it allowed me to do is I'm personally going around to these places, dropping off cases of gin and the other things that we made. And anytime that would happen, of course, they're used to talking to sales reps. Well, any of the, you know, liquor store owners or spirits buy would drop everything, immediately stop talking to the rep and start talking to me and asking questions about process and that kind of stuff. So there were advantages to working in those darker times before Mad Men came out. And then Mad Men came out, and suddenly we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And our sales just exploded, and that's what's led to this building. So this is we built a 10,000 square foot building for production and tasting, with I guess was it 4,000 square feet for our dunnage warehouse. And then we just expanded our malt house now and added another 10,000 square feet. But that had nothing to do with anything that we did. We were just in the right luck. We were finally in the right place at the right time. And then at that point, you know, just like, you know, St. George Spirits were looked at as the geezers on the market that have been around for a long time. And that's been a good thing. That's been helpful. And it's pulled us through the pandemic when everybody is buying what they know, you know, especially when people were, you know, using, I don't know where the hell using these things to order booze. You're not exactly window shopping for the most part. You're going to find what you want and go and get it. But we didn't know in the first few months of the pandemic, but we were lucky enough to be part of that, you know, that people know us and we're looking to support us. And so all those years in the trenches of selling one bottle at a time, it's the only way we know how to do it. Paid off and kept the lights on, thankfully.
Yeah. So you talk, you know, you ultimately start with a clean slate. You're going to build a distillery. And I'm lucky enough to have been out there, and you actually took me on a tour with my buddy Royce Neely. We came out there one time, and, you know, you're a visionary for these things. So starting with a clean slate allows you to build it the way you want to. And of course, your brother being an engineer, I'm sure that probably plays into it too. But tell the audience about some of the things that are really unique about coming out to Leopold Brothers, things that you've thought through from your years of experience and then being able to start new. So some cool stuff.
Well, this is where the family comes in again. So my dad was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard, taught at Virginia Tech at the end of his career, and he was a landscape architect.
Nice.
So he did the grounds that you saw. That was him.
Yeah.
My mom was a textile major at Cornell, so she handled all the interiors of the tasting room, where I'm just staring at lines. So we've got three people who know how to read blueprints, and I'm not one of them. So I finally stopped coming to the meetings because I'm like,
just let them handle it. Yeah,
guys, I'm dead weight. I don't understand what you're talking about. And one of the funny things, or thing I'll remember for a long time, they rendered the whole thing in 3 dimensions for me, so that I could understand what the hell I was looking at. And, you know, so they show the building and they're like, so what do you think? I'm like, is that what you expected? And I'm like, I didn't know what to expect. That was the whole problem. I had
Right.
no idea. This is
Mhm.
beautiful. Thank you. I don't know what else to say, but a few things we did. The distilleries that I worked at in Austria and Germany were all farm distilleries. So it was like, you know, it was like working in a Disney movie. Just
Was there
beautiful.
like spontaneous singing numbers? Like
Yeah,
you
you know,
got into
just
song and
you've
dance?
got yeah. I mean, every single one of them had brooks that were in the back, just absolutely beautiful, and the beautiful, 200-year-old homes with the stucco, and I just really
Oh, okay.
like that stucco, and so we added that because we wanted people to know that a lot of the manufacturing plants are just concrete. And
Yeah.
we wanted to let people know this is a family business and that, you're in a different place. So that was my only addition to the whole thing. On the
Envision
design.
the fish sort of popping up at the brook, start singing songs.
Right. Believe me.
All in a row.
We wanted to do put enough water features in for frogs, but
Yeah.
we didn't have enough space for that, unfortunately. So a few things that we do our own malting floor. So again, the malting diplomas that I have, I just wanted to put them to work. And we decided to build from the ground up because we knew it would be cheaper in the end. Because by the time the city puts you through the ringer with a used building, your price per square foot's more to rehab an old building than it is just to build from the ground up. And what we did was sit down with the fire marshal and the head of city planning, the building department, and say, all right, here's the lot. Where do you want everything? Where do you want the doors? Where do you want the stills? Where do you want you tell us where these things need to be, and we'll put them there, and then leave us alone.
Yeah, right.
So we don't have to bicker or complain or this, if the door needs to be this wide, or, they treat us like we're making nuclear weapons, and part of it is rightfully so. They're making the building safer. So that's, don't want to complain about that. So we have gardens that are outside that are directly outside our fermentation room. So our fermentation room is designed so that windows open in the morning. Craig gets in here at 4:30. Probably in another, if I had to guess, another 3-4 weeks, we'll start opening the windows again. It's just too hot to do that now.
Mm-hmm.
And the building is designed to draw the air out of the windows and up across the fermenters and up out the top of the building. And what we're trying to do is encourage wild yeast and bacteria to live in the wooden fermenters that we have as the years go by, so that hopefully when Ellie is of age to start running the stills, we'll have some pretty bitchin' fermenters to work with a unique environment. So that was one of the things we did. The malt house, we're now one of the largest floor malt houses in the country, in the world, really, as far as I know. There aren't too many of us left. We also added what's called a Dunder Pit. That's something we haven't really, speaking of scoops, I guess. When we added our expansion, we just, it's something I've wanted to work with for a long time. A Dunder Pit, for the listeners who don't know, it's something that's used to produce what's called high ester rum. And it's basically a bioreactor.
Mm-hmm.
And the bioreactor is designed to create organic acids that you can't create under normal fermentation parameters. So in other words, an easy way to kind of think of it, you've got lactic acid that's going to be in all mashes, really, no matter what you do. So if you didn't know, malt is rife with lactobacillus. It's just loaded with it. And so you're always going to get a little bit of lactic acid behind in your mash, no matter what you do. And if you have the correct kind of lactobacillus, what's called heterofermentative, if you have a strain that's heterofermentative, you're going to get a second one that's acetic acid. So these two organic acids are building blocks. And when you have organic acids in a barrel, so you mash and you distill your whiskey, you've got organic acids sitting in that alcohol solution in that barrel. Over time, oxygen will combine with them, will work its way into the barrels, react with these organic acids to create esters. And so the acetic acid, to me, is kind of the more important one. It's where you get isobutyl acetate, which is what, to me, is Kentucky bourbon, Kentucky rye. So it tastes like raspberries. Some people say stone fruit. That's really the big one, is isobutyl acetate, unless you're Beam or some of the other guys that use different strains of yeast. And then you get isoamyl acetate, which is bananas Foster, banana cream pie, whatever it is you want to talk about. But the purpose behind the Dunder Pit is that you're creating butyric acid, which smells absolutely horrible, which is why you want it outside, which is what we've
in a
done.
pit somewhere.
And butyric acid is the building block for a whole bunch of esters that are tropical in nature. So think mango, pineapple, that sort of thing. Or if you really want to put it this way, rum-like flavors that you'll get. And so the butyric acid is something that we're doing. The only difference that in what they're doing with the Dunder Pit in the Caribbean, obviously the temperatures are different. So the way that I actually run it is entirely different from what they do, because we're in Colorado. But suffice it to say, we're making barrels of whiskey. We're applying a rum technology, an older rum technology, to whiskey. And just having some fun with that.
Nice.
We have a dunnage style warehouse. That's pretty unique as far as I'm aware in American whiskey maturation. And that just means, to me anyways, literally it means the stacking material that looks like ladders that you put between the barrels, and you usually stack them maybe 4 high at the most. But what it connotates is that you have earthen floors. And so that was a design that I put in to get around having such a dry climate. So today the moisture in Denver is probably around 8 or 9%. I actually haven't looked yet today, but August we typically get single digit. Well, think about your barrel as a permeable membrane. The amount of water that you have in the air affects the angel share. So in other words, how much evaporates out of that barrel. And I'm sure most of your distilling guests that you've had from the 4 corner states, they all do something. That they will mature just in a regular concrete warehouse, and they'll pump water into the air to try and slow it down. Or actually, as far as I know, Garrison Brothers just let it go. You'd have to confirm that with them, but I think that they just intentionally let it go, and they get 10, 15% per year, and a very, very intense oak presence in their whiskeys, which is cool too. That's just another way to do it. What we did, we're trying to make it so that I'm not big on barrels, and that goes back to eau de vie and the German brewing, where what I'm trying to do is highlight the ingredients as best as I can. It's just how I think. Right now, it's not the cool way to do it. Within the mainstream, 95% of the whiskey buyers that are out there want barrel, and more barrel. And can you please have more barrel? And by the way, add more barrel to this. And yeah, this is okay, but you need to age it for another 10 years. And, you get the idea. Obviously, this is hyperbole, but that's kind of the polar opposite to how we handle things here. So as a result, I don't want that big barrel presence. So by designing the building, we've got plants that encircle the building with drip irrigation, with some nice, again, my dad, with some, nice layers of rock that start big and get a little smaller as we go. You get the idea. What that does is it keeps the soil inside the building moist, and it makes it so it's about 20 to 30% more humid inside where the barrels are being stored than outside. And so instead of getting 10, 15% evaporation per year, we're at 4.1. So that was one where I actually got a nice handshake from Scott.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I knew it would work. I knew it would help. I didn't think it would help that much. 4.1 is pretty typical of what you see out of Kentucky.
Yeah.
So I was quite pleased with that. But of course, part of it too is that, in January and February, it's cold enough where it just slows evaporation to nothing, basically. So that's part of it too. So I'm trying to make whiskey that's unique to the area and unique to Colorado. And so the idea is just let it go. So there's no heat, there's no electricity in the building at all, which is a nice kind of a sustainable way of handling things as well. And we think it makes good whiskey too.
It's something you said there, when we talk to different people, and there's no one I think has the right answer, but a lot of people in the distilling industry for bourbon and whiskey will talk about 80-85% of the flavor that we're getting in the bottle comes from the barrel itself. It comes from that time, that interaction, that we're going to, for lack of a better term, that breathing, that filtration that goes through the barrel, the soaking in of the different compounds, the being pushed back in, the blending, just that time, that interaction. And as you're talking about this and all the different unique things that you've done throughout the distillery to create these unique profiles, your focus is less on the barrel and more on, again, going back to the earlier part of the conversation, the recipe, the fermentation, kind of all the efforts going into that. Clearly, that's a different approach than what you see out there in the industry. And you've even acknowledged that. As people try your products, what would you tell them the differences they're going to get from those for what they might be more accustomed to?
You're going to be able to taste the grain a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't going to taste as much heat. Another thing, kind of going back to that Bavarian brewing adage that I mentioned, and I just want to make sure I put this one caveat in there. I love Kentucky whiskey. I love Tennessee whiskey. I'm an enormous fan of all of the larger distillers. I just want to make that clear. I just don't want to make whiskey the same way that they do, because they'll kick my ass. What am I going to do? What you think I'm going to outcompete Harlan Wheatley? Our production methods are different with intent. A big part of what makes Kentucky whiskey, in my opinion, and I know so there's going to be exceptions and some use different temperatures, but for the most part, the tendency is to ferment hotter. Mm-hmm. So, the high 70s, 80s, and 90s are very common temperatures. The reason that they like to do that is they're trying to stress their yeast out intentionally. So they're doing the opposite of what I'm trying to do. They want to do that because it creates esters. The reason I don't want to do that, and let's go back to brewing for just a second. When you use those warmers, it's unthinkable to ferment a beer in the 80s or 90s. Believe me, as a brewer, like what? Well, there are a few beers now that you can, but setting that aside, your typical ale, typical IPA or whatever. I ferment in the 60s. I ferment much, much lower because I'm looking for that organic acid reaction that I'll circle back to here in a second. But the Kentucky distillers, what they're trying to do is they're trying to create esters in the fermenter by using those warmer temperatures, by using their own particular yeast strains that are getting those flavors, and they're stressing them out. The problem with that, in my mind, the biggest ester of all is ethyl acetate, and it's going to wind up making that whiskey taste hot. That doesn't mean anything to them because the bulk of their whiskey is sitting in the barrel somewhere between 4 and 15 years. So by the time they're done, for the most part, you have to have a pretty attuned palate to pick up on that heat. Mm-hmm. Or if you talk to people like Charles Cowdery, who I just adore, he says whatever anybody says that bourbon is smooth, they don't know what they're talking about. And that's what he means. What he's talking about is using those warmer fermentation temperatures creates a lot more of that heat. Ethyl acetate is one of them. Higher alcohols are another. Basically, everything that gives you a hangover is going to wind up showing in that fermenter. But if you drop that in a number 3 or number 4 char barrel and let it sit for 10 years, not only are some of the alcohols going to change, some of the chemistry is going to change, but you're also going to pull out so many wood sugars that you're not necessarily going to notice it as much, and you're just not going to care.
Right.
So when I have time, I explain this to a customer that if you're expecting that, you're not going to get that when you're tasting our whiskey. There's nothing wrong with that, and I adore that way of making whiskey as well. But our whiskey is going to be much softer because we like to ferment in the 60s. 60, 62 degrees is where we're pitching, which is very cold, relatively. And in addition to that, we make a very low alcohol mash, which is something that is left over from the 1800s. It was very, very typical to make a 5 to 6% alcohol mash. Now, of course, what happened when the bean counters showed up? Well, can't you just make a 10% and double the amount you're making? And of course, the answer is yes, absolutely, I can do that. Mm-hmm. Now, there are consequences with this. Some of it's fine, some of it's good, some of it's, in my opinion, bad. but we ferment, you know, at that much lower gravity, the starting sugar. So we'll start at, let's say, 12% sugar as opposed to 18. And so when you're thinking about yeast, that's basically, you know, for us, we're giving it a nice salad for lunch, basically. It's very, very easy to consume it all. It's very easy to make sure you're not making dextrins, which leads to losses. And it's very, very easy to end ferment rather quickly. Where we like to make our esters that I touched on with what we have going on outside with the garden, we're fermenting for 72 hours, and then we're letting it sit for another 2 days. And in that 2 days, the lactobacillus that we have, and remember, we're making our own malt. So we have lactobacillus strains that are specific to Leopold Brothers Distillery. That starts to work on that substrate, and it starts to consume things that the yeast can't, and it's giving off organic acids into that mash. So if you look at a fermenter at Leopold Brothers on day 7, before we drop it into the still, doesn't matter which one we're doing, except for vodka. Nobody wants to talk about vodka here, right? So, but if you look at the top of the fermenter, you'll have what's called floor. It's basically a film of lactic acid that's going to work. And I'm thinking like a bacteria, right? When you're fermenting, you want to think like a yeast cell. But when I'm trying to get this organic reaction in the fermenter, now I'm thinking like a bacteria, and I need to limit it. So I'm limiting how much food it can have. I'm limiting its access to oxygen. And I'm limiting it with the pH that we have inside that fermenter. So we get pHs that are in the 2s. So it's very, very sour by the time we drive in there. But we want to make sure that it's not completely spiraling out of control. So it's a controlled secondary fermentation. So the first primary fermentation, we're adding yeast. So it's a dry distiller's strain, but we're also adding liquid strains to it. It's then fermenting in 72 hours. And then when that yeast is done, it's going to just settle out, flocculate. And then that bacteria is going to start to go to work, which is, I don't know of any other place that's doing this. The closest I can think of is a conversation I had with Dave Pickerel many years ago, where I was explaining, you know, this process that I use. And he said, yeah, I use that for malt whiskey anytime that I'm trying to make something that's similar to Scotch. But in Scotch or malt whiskey parlance, what they like to use is the term, how many hours are you fermenting? So anything that's higher than 72 hours lets you know that you're letting the lactobacillus do a little bit of work. And most of the places, you know, end up capping out at, you know, maybe 90, 92 hours, something like that. They don't want it to go completely nuts, I guess. But like most former brewers, you get sick of making the same yeast all the time.
Yeah.
So it's part of what we're doing to try and breathe life into the whiskeys that we're making. Yeah. So 2 more things. This is why I said there's no way this is going to be 30 minutes. To answer your question in terms of what the different things that we're doing, and then what the customers are going to be tasting in our bourbon. So let's run through it real quick. I already talked about the low gravity. Yep. I already talked about the cold fermentation. Yep. I already talked about the bacterial fermentation. Yep. We're in the dunnage warehouse at 50%. So we've got the lowest entry proof and have for over 10 years. This again comes back to a papers that I came across many years ago that was the standard. That was the American standard. Everybody was in at 100, and that changed in 1962. They raised the law from 55% up to 62.5, and even then, it still took time for them to start moving that up. The problem with that, they're doing that to save money. Obviously, you need fewer barrels, fewer rick houses, yada, yada, yada. But that changes all the interactions inside that barrel. But the easiest part to understand is what happens when you come to bottle it. So if you're in at 62.5 and it goes up to 66 and you bottle it at, say, 45,
or water,
you out all the flavors that you worked hard to develop. And I just don't like that. In addition to going in at 50%, the dunnage warehouse that I designed, and this part was not intentional. I wish I was that smart, but the whiskey comes out at 50%. So by volume, the alcohol and the water are evaporating at the same rate. So as a result, if you have our bottled and bond, it's also cask strength. But we didn't we didn't put that on the label though. Well, if you're a fan of cast strength and you buy something that says cast strength and you go home and it's, wait, why isn't this in the 60s? We didn't want to have customers feel cheated.
Yeah.
But that's a general run through, as best as I can, Jeremy, as to what people would expect and how that's going to. And one last thing, 20% malt. So we use an elevated amount of malt.
Yep.
Again, it goes back to the older distilleries in the 1800s were using it. But more importantly, we don't mash with any outside enzymes. So German purity law hang over, I guess, on my part on that. That I don't see the need to do it. And adding that 20% malt, more than a few tasters have either called it malt forward, or this is bourbon for people who really like Irish whiskey, or
it's creamier. You're gonna have a more creamier note to it.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot here to talk about from the fermentation, the cooking side, if you will, making that better quality product. Better is maybe not the right word, because everyone, you look at a lot of these different distilleries, they all have good products that target different.
Just different. Yeah.
All depending upon what you enjoy. But if you're looking for something that's going to have more, in my opinion, more depth, more complexity, more that old school vintage flavor without the high proof, the high heat, a lot of the things that you're doing are going to be throwbacks to those. Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden, and you really downplayed the whole use of the still. But yet one of the biggest stories has been your use of the 3-chamber still this year. So, you're kind of like talking out of both sides of your ass on this one.
Yes, very much so. I was hoping you'd enjoy that oxymoron or the moron, depending on how
but at the same time,
look at it.
But I do like the approach of just better things going in. Just, it's like the old Bill Samuels comment, if you do everything right at the beginning, just don't fuck it up. And so when you get to the still, now it's time to, not screw up all the work you did up front to make that happen. So let's talk to us about this 3-chamber still, why you did it, what really kind of what you were looking to get out of it.
Well, it was it was something that I came across fairly early in my distilling career. The first paper was one that was commissioned by the IRS right after the Bottled and Bond Act. And I come to find out actually just a few months ago from David Wondrich, the historian, cocktail writer. The head of the IRS at the time was what we would call today a foodie, but like a whiskey foodie who would travel to Ireland and travel to Canada and travel to Scotland on his time off and visit distilleries. And he thought it was a crying shame, all of the counterfeiting that was going on at the time. And so he commissioned a couple lab rats to go in and look at 31 different distilleries. I think the furthest west was in Illinois. Excuse me. And it basically was looking at, okay, what kind of still did you use? What was your mash bill? How big was the still? Was your warehouse heated? All of these different things, relatively long list of things. And then he took samples of the new make. And then every year, annually for 8 years by the time they were done. So it was commissioned in the 1800s and finished in, I think, 1907 or 1908. I can't remember. But about half of the producers made rye of the 31, and every single one of them used a chamber still of one way or the other, either a straight up 3-chamber still or what some people call today log stills. Mm-hmm. Log stills are chamber stills. Mm-hmm. I'm noticing that people aren't necessarily noticing that that's the case. They're 1 and 2 chamber stills. Mm-hmm. And so as I came across this paper, I wondered, like everybody else, what the hell is a 3-chamber still? Mm-hmm. And that's what started me down the rabbit hole. And at the time, we were up in Michigan, so another kind of happy accident here. There was a team from Google that had been set up to start digitizing the University of Michigan's archives. So what would now be called Google Books You know, a lot of the stuff that you can find in Google Books. I was getting ready access to that sooner than a lot of people. And of course, they would hang out in our place. And I would, of course, ask them, want to have some search words to look for me? Whiskey, rye whiskey, Baltimore rye, Pennsylvania rye, Monongahela rye, bourbon, you know, handing some of those. And so we'd wind up getting some of these documents that were, you know, lost to just about anybody except for the most ardent researcher, as far as I know anyway. You know, outside of maybe the Filson, you know, with Michael Veach and some of the other historians have some good access to, you know, United Distillers archives. But anyway, I came across mention of the 3-chamber, and then I start seeing more mentions of it and discussions of it being sold as heavy bodied whiskey. And then I finally saw some drawings, and then I basically would just sit and stare at the drawings and understand, okay, why are they using this still, and how is this different than a pot or a column? And what really did it for me is I came across a civil engineering book that was a flow chart that basically showed how to make chemicals. So in other words, how do you make sodium hydroxide? How do you make creosote? How do you, and it was going through here, add this and heat this to this temperature and all of this. And for some reason, they did an article on what was at the time the largest distillery in the world. And it was a Hiram Walker plant in Peoria, Illinois. And they made 100,000 gallons of whiskey a day, which is big even by today's standards. You know, total, as I said in the documentary, make Gilded Age thinking, right? Where if we're going to build something, we're going to make an ungodly amount of stuff, and that's the end of it, right? Well, in the flow chart, they had 2 column stills and a 3-chamber still, and that was it. And once I saw that, I'm like, if you're trying to make 100,000 gallons a day, and you already had 2 column stills, why in heaven's name would you put in a 3-chamber still? The only possible reason that you could have, because they were running rye in the columns as well, is that the distillate is completely different. And of course, you know, in these papers and readings that I came across, that's what everybody said. This made the best whiskey. The notes in the IRS document that I mentioned, this makes a very refined, beautiful whiskey. They'd have, you know, kind of thrown in tasting notes for some of the samples that they were tasting, and they were always made in the 3-chamber. And when I looked at the drawing, I understood how it worked. Happily, I was far enough along in my career that I got it, that I understand the physics of what it was that I was.
This is the same guy who looks at a blueprint for a building and has no idea what's going on.
Well,
still in his mind, he can build it. It's so cool. I love it, Todd. It's a cool thing, really.
Well, it's piping an instrument diagram. I can do, but yeah, actual buildings, I'm worthless.
Buildings, awesome. Shrubbery, and bushes, and you're just lost.
That's it. You got it. So, and then so I wanted to build it when we put in the new building that I'm in right now, which I guess it's been about eight years, I guess now, 7 years, something like that. And it was either my brother made me choose between the 3-chamber still and the floor malting. The floor malting was much more of a sure thing, right? It was a safer path to take. We have world-class barley here because Coors malts here. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but we would not have done it without that. There are some malt houses, in my opinion, that just have one hell of an uphill battle because they're trying to grow barley where it doesn't belong, in really high humidity environments where bacteria and mold are problems. Here in Colorado, it's dry as hell, and particularly during harvest. And so as a result, we have access to world-class barley, and all I have to do is not screw it up.
Yeah.
We've got good malt, you know. And so, but eventually, I think it was Charles Cowdery. I think it was Charles, or it may have been David Wondrich. One or the other did a piece which mentioned them in Whiskey Advocate. I think it was Dave, saying that he wished someone would build one. And I'm like, oh shit. So I told my brother, well, it's now or never, because in my mind, somebody else was going to see that. And finally, decide to pull the trigger on it. And of course, now looking back, that was just, I'm not the smart of the two brothers, is a polite way to put it. But when I understood how it actually works and why it works. So the easy way to explain it, if you don't mind me.
Sure.
Yeah,
We want to hear that.
We would love it.
Let me explain a column still first. And these are generalities. Okay. So I want to make sure that it's clear. I've had a couple of our fellow distillers send me corrections about things that I'm like, dude, I'm on a podcast. This isn't a scientific paper.
This isn't a lecture series.
I am leaving so much out so that people don't fall asleep. Cut me some slack.
And just for the audience, be clear, if you have any corrections, we will post Todd's personal cell number after the show.
Right,
yeah, sure.
And his email information where you can reach him.
It's always prefaced because my brother gets the ones to the main email is, oh, you're going to love
we
this.
We can put his information.
Yeah, we'll get
down
his number out there.
That's He'll just dump it off on me. So a column still, the design for it is basically you're coming in at 8%, let's say, alcohol. It's cascading down basically like a set of stairs down the column, and you're injecting live steam from the bottom, and the live steam is going to head to a doubler, condenser, whatever that's in the way. And from entry basically at that 8 or 9 or whatever it is percent alcohol to exit is animal feed, where all the alcohol's been stripped out. The design parameters of Sherman's will tell you this is 90 seconds basically. So that's give or take. You can run it faster, slower, blah, blah, blah. And the warmest temperature in here, the control temperature is usually somewhere around 198. Again, your mileage may vary, but that's roughly what it is. The 3 chambers still, you've got one pot on top of another. So you've got 3 of them. Each one is holding a separate mash in it of rye. That bottom chamber has about 10 feet of head on top of it because of all the rye mash that's on it. So what does that do? That's creating some overpressure in here. And when you introduce the steam into that bottom chamber to start a run, this bottom mash has almost no alcohol in it at all. Hi, Vaughn. It's good to see. The gentleman here builds our dunnage for us, and we're in desperate need. So sorry, hello. Good man. That bottom, because of that overpressure and because there's almost no alcohol on it, you can think of it. Alan Bishop put it well. I think it was Alan. Called it, sweet rye water. Basically, that's almost what it is in that bottom chamber. The temperature is going to be north of 210, all the way north of 220 degrees. So it's a lot higher temperature, and it's a please, of course. I wanted to know if he could have his soda. I love that man. Works his ass off and wants to know it's okay to have a soda from us. But anyway, so much higher temperature, which means it's going to extract things that are much more soluble in water, which means oils. So the way I like to describe this still is it's an oil extraction machine. The one that's above it has half the amount of alcohol. Now say we're at the start. Okay, so we're just about to do another run. We just collected heads, hearts, and tails. Let's use this as a starting point. So the mash that's in the top has the full alcohol in it because it just came out of the preheater, and it has, for us, 5% alcohol. The next one down has, just to make the math easy, half of that alcohol left. So let's say 2.5% alcohol. And the one on the bottom, as I mentioned, it's just almost next to nothing in it. So you're introducing live steam that goes through the bottom chamber, up through the second chamber, up through the third, over to a condenser. Okay. So as it's entering in, what you're getting are really 3 different distillations in one. The first one is behaving like a water still. And the metaphor I like to use, or the example I like to use, are rose. If you've ever had rose oil or lavender oil, the way that that's made is you've got your pot still, you fill it all the way to the top with flowers, you screw a top on, it runs over to the condenser, and you inject live steam. So again, steam, the temperature is going to be elevated, right? It's under pressure.
Yep.
So that temperature is going to be north into the 230s or whatever pressure they run it at. Everybody, I'm sure, is different, blah, blah, blah. But steam is the carrier and water is the carrier, and it's going to strip the oils out of that lavender on the way to the condenser and come out as an oil. And it just has, if you've ever smelled lavender oil or orange oil, neroli, any of those kind of things, aromatics that you buy from candle shops and whatnot, the aromas are unbelievably strong, and the top notes are just to die for. The problem with this is that if you let it sit, it's going to oxidize over time. It's going to fade. The 3-chamber still is giving you that kind of an oil experience, and then a half an alcohol experience, and then a full alcohol experience, right? So that water and the aroma that the oils are carrying with it are going to be strengthened with the alcohol distillation out of that top chamber, and now it's shelf stable. So it's coming off of the still, relatively speaking, at a high proof, 60 all the way up to 70% alcohol. So, but it's still carrying those oils that you ordinarily would not get out of a pot or out of a column. And it makes it so that the aroma, if you add a splash of water to it and leave the room and come back, it's room filling. You're really going to get the aromas on it. And it's also going to carry different flavors that you're not going to necessarily get. So you're going to get a lot more of the linalool out of rye. Linalool is lavender. So it's intensely floral as a result. But over time, when you drop that whiskey down into a barrel, just like all other whiskeys, you're going to develop your esters. You're going to get your stone fruit notes. You're going to get your plum notes and peach notes, and all of those things mixed in with those beautiful floral notes. And it really makes a whiskey that's truly entirely different. And to finish my oxymoron, the still does matter.
Does matter. Yeah.
And let's be honest. I mean, this is it sounds great. Obviously, anyone who's had very oily, very viscous whiskeys before can appreciate potentially what this could do for products. But this hasn't been done. These stills haven't been produced in decades. Yeah. And not just produced, but it's not like you can go find some old, crotchety person who used to work at Seagram's or someplace and say, hey, walk me through how you ran these things. These people just aren't around. So not only was this risky for you, it's an expensive endeavor. And the stories I've heard is even people, that make these type of, make stills, the Shermans and, all these other places, they're like, how the heck's this thing going to work?
Yeah.
So this was a pretty risky thing for you to kind of take on, to say, okay, we're going to spend a lot of money to have this thing made. And it's not like I can call someone and say, hey, how do I get this thing, A, running, and B, fine tuned. So, what, kind of talk to us about some of the early days of kind of getting this going and some of the ups and downs of that process.
Well, again, this has been fun for us that more folks are understanding how foolish this was. It really was. And the story I've told probably too many times now is when Little Book showed up in the shop to have a look at the still, I was realizing that we're in Denver. We're not in Louisville. We're not in Tennessee. We're not in the center of the whiskey world. And I didn't think anybody was really paying attention to this at all. So, understand, from my perspective, that, being in this business for 21 years, whiskey fans is a total thing unto itself. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep.
And they're relatively new. This is for the most part.
Oh yeah.
I mean, outside of, Louisville in some pockets, they're relatively new. Mm-hmm. You've got absinthe fans. That's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah. That's a whole group there.
And then you have people that are into gin. Then you have people that are into vodka. So there's a bartender world, right? The people who go to Tales of the Cocktail, that go to the Berlin Bar Show, that they all know us, and they've known us for 20 years. Mm-hmm. We're very, very well known. If you go to a serious cocktail bar in most cities, if the bartender's been around for a while, they know exactly who we are, and that we're very well known for making quality cordials and gins and that sort of thing. I didn't know how many people were paying attention to what we were doing with the whiskey until Little Book showed up, who's a tremendous person, by the way. I really like him a lot, and he's going to be taking Beam in some cool new directions. I actually just saw that the new center opened up this week, which is a completely different story, obviously. But it's been fun for me and for my brother, gratifying for Scott that more and more people are catching on to who the real visionary was. It wasn't me. It was the guy who listened to me and decided to cut the check. It's a 20-foot tall copper still. Take a wild guess as to how much that is. It is not an inexpensive piece of equipment. And he had to have complete faith in me that I knew that the whiskey would be different. It would not have done any good if the whiskey was just good. Who cares? There's plenty of good whiskey on the shelf, right?
Right.
It would have made absolutely no difference whatsoever. So to your question, the early days, the first day was one of the best days of my career. I ran it on a Saturday. And of course, long before my brother cut a check, I had to tell him exactly what it was. What is this going to do? How is this whiskey different? How is it going to taste different? and are people for sure going to be able to tell that this was made in a 3-chamber still? And that first day, I tell the story that I called him up. Hey, it's everything I was thinking. When you run that, well, let's try and do this. You got your hydrometer cup where the alcohol comes out, and you put the spindle in that tells you what the alcohol is. It throws a meniscus that's a couple centimeters high. And of course I saw that. That's the first thing I saw. Was it looked like, clear motor oil or glycerin or something was coming out of the still. There was so
even
much
looked different,
oil.
Different by the eye. Yeah.
You got it. When you're used to staring at, parrots for 15 years, you get to know, what looks right and what looks different. So that was the very first thing. And then
you got to wait, Todd. It's like 4 years.
Yeah, well, that was the other.
I mean, it's not like, okay, in 2 weeks we'll know how this thing turned out. No, you're going to wait years.
When we first bought it, I told them, I said it's possible that the whiskey could be ready for 2 years, but on that Saturday, I said no. There's no way that this is going to taste even reasonably good after 2 years. And so he was like, okay, well, it is what it is now. Let's go. And it was so rich in lavender, lavender and cocoa and clove, the same flavors that you get out of that Hefeweizen. So I skipped over. We had a special variety of rye called a Bruisy Rye that was used by Maryland distillers in particular in the 1800s. Okay. That's very, very low in starch. Most modern ryes are now about 80% starch. The Bruisy Rye is 62%, right around there. That at least that's how it grows here in Colorado. And the difference between having something at 62 and 80, if I'm making a 5% alcohol beer, starch is the same thing as sugar. And I need to feed the yeast enough sugar to get to that 5% alcohol. So if I have something that's at 62 and something that's 80, I'll save you the math. You have to add 30% more of the Bruisy Rye. So what does that mean? That means I'm making that whiskey bigger right out of the gate, before anything else, before whatever still, before your fermentation. It's going to be a bigger whiskey, full stop. In addition to that, a Bruisy Rye has about 20% more linalool than modern ryes that I came across to. Again, that's lavender, elderflower, chamomile, whatever flavor you ascribe to that. And it also has an elevated amount of compound called ferulic acid. Ferulic acid is the building block for the spice note that people believe comes from rye. It doesn't come from rye. It comes from a reaction of ferulic acid together with a Hefeweizen strain of yeast, and all the major distilling strains are Hefeweizen strains. And in brewer's parlance, we call it POF positive, which means phenolic off flavor. So in other words, clove, which is great if you're making a Hefeweizen or a Saison, but it's an off flavor if you're trying to make a standard beer, your Pilsner, your Pale Ale, that kind of thing. So that's why brewers call it phenolic off flavor. But what's fascinating is Red Star, M1, M2, Maori. I'm trying to name the rest of the Scotch yeasts. Every single one of those are POF positive. The reason that you don't get spiciness from most malt whiskeys, you can in traces, by the way, is that most barley varieties don't have a lot of ferulic acid. So what you're taught as a when you're making Hefeweizen, which of course I made for 15 years as a brewer, to manipulate that ferulic acid. And that can either by adding more wheat into the recipe. Most good wheat varieties have ferulic acid in it. And you can also manipulate the mashing temperatures, since we're already down the rabbit hole. The ferulic acid, a lot of it is bound in the cell wall. So
Yep.
if you use lower temperatures, you have a tendency to break more of it down, and then you get more clove flavor in your Hefeweizen, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, but that, again, going back to if I used modern varieties of rye and did not use our own floor malt, this whiskey would be different and it would not be as big as it is. So we're back to, yes, this still is important, but what you put in there is always more important in my opinion.
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
So Todd, and we have the benefit of hindsight now. We're not talking to you 2 years ago about what this is going to be like, and but you talked about all the pressure in that 3-chamber still, that steam coming up. The only thing with more pressure at Leopold Brothers had to be you, but because you want this thing and it's a big expense out there, and then you got to wait years. And it's not just your brother who cut the check, as you said, but everyone else is watching too. The industry's watching, fans are watching, writers are watching, bloggers are watching, podcasters are watching, and they want to know what's going to happen with this. But then the great story here is it comes out and it goes beyond our expectations. We're told that, and again, as bourbon fans, we hear a lot of stories. We're told a story that this is going to be different. This is an old school approach. It's going to be different, and it comes out and it meets every one of those things, and it exceeds our expectations. So you, as that person, that guy who read that information, who looked at those things and said, I know how to put this together. How does that feel when that comes out and you finally get the accolades from fans, from podcasts and all the bloggers and all that kind of stuff?
Relief.
It's not like a touchdown dance or in the Olympics when you get a gold, you're crying. It's just relief.
Maybe when I'm older.
Uh-huh.
Right now, I have a hard time wrapping my head around some of the things that are being written.
Yeah.
As I've told Alan Bishop many times, I'm not much of an alpha male. So it's kind of, when Little Book left, what I was worried about that night, I told my wife, Jim Beam's great grandson came to see the still. Boy, a lot more people are watching this than I thought. And then, of course, when I went to bed, I'm like, oh, Jesus, everybody's watching it.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't
First,
know.
it's kind of cool. And then, oh, wait a minute.
Well, it's kind of like the people that say that they're, what is that, Moneyball?
Yeah.
Billy Bean says that he hates losing
Mm-hmm.
and he likes winning.
Right.
That there's a difference. Right here, the thought of being that, a footnote, or who was that crazy guy that was talking about a 3-chamber still, and having that not happen with what was a relief. Now, I thought it was totally different this whole time, right? So in other words, it doesn't mature the same way that other whiskeys do. And I had to tell my crew not to panic because, of course, they're tasting it after a year going, Todd, what the hell is this? And it's like, guys, you just have to, the maturation cue for 3-chamber rye is that flower note. The flower note is absolutely overpowering, and not in a good way, for the first few years while the wood sugars are pulled out and while the esters start to prop up with the way we make whiskey anyway.
Right.
We had to be patient. And after the 4th summer, that's when it was, okay, here we are. We've arrived. Hooray. But it when I read, David Broom, I don't know if you saw David Broom's comment, that one kind of made my dad lose it because he said it was the most important whiskey release in America in the last century. And my wife, being my wife, she said, well, that's only 20 years. Thanks, honey. But
right.
I don't necessarily agree with them. There's a lot of beautiful whiskeys that are coming out right now. It is, what I had set out to do when we started this was to make something different, to make something delicious. That's the most important thing, right? Is that it's, delicious and something that I enjoyed, drinking, and so does the crew here. We take a lot of pride in it. But, I thought that this was going to revive the style. That's what I was, we were in a hurry to try and get it done because we figured, well, somebody else is going to do this. And of course, Vendome was nice enough to, give us a heads up if anybody was, looking to have them build it. No one did. And now, of course, that I'm on the other end, I understand why. It's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly inefficient. to run something like this versus a column. So a column with the same amount of copper, I mean, hell, you could pump out 100 barrels a day with the same amount of copper, and we're doing 2.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily designed with the people that have bigger aspirations. And if you couple that with how expensive it is, and together with the fact that no one else knows how to run it, which is no small thing. I don't know if anybody else is going to do it, but in my mind, when we started this, that's kind of what I was hoping. This is a lost style of whiskey, and wouldn't it be neat with other, and when Little Book was here, we were kind of, standing there with our arms folded, looking up at the still, laughing at the idea of how big would this still need to be in order to make enough for just a small run for Beam?
Right.
It'd have to be enormous, and you'd have to have multiple stills. And even for big companies like that, I'm sure you guys saw Brown-Forman had to sell off a distillery because their sales were down from the tariffs and other reasons overseas. They were in a cash crunch. You think that because they're too big to fail or whatever, but this is a risky thing that we did. It was a foolish thing that we did, and looking at it, we've said that more than a couple times over the last 6 months. We can't even remember having a meeting where we decided to do it. I don't know if we were in passing, and Scott said, "All right, pull the trigger. I don't want to hear about this anymore." I honestly don't remember, but it was not a very fiscally smart. It was not a sure thing, and it was where the older brother bet on a little bit of art. I think there's a little bit of art in what it is we do, without sounding pretentious. And I think he relished the idea of us, taking another path and doing something a little bit different, and that he believed enough in me that it's a bit of it's a nice compliment that the crew here does whenever we release something new. They assume it's going to be delicious. They have faith in me, I guess. And I have to look at them and say, that's not a sure thing, right? Not a sure thing that everybody is going to love it, and that it's difficult to come up with gins and cordials and this and that. And I make what I like, and you just have to hope that enough people like what you do, that they'll keep the lights on. Because again, I know that this is not what the cool kids are drinking right now. So this is as grain forward as it gets. The 3-chamber rye, the ingredients that go into that still are screaming at you, but by comparison to your Kentucky Owl that's been in a barrel for 18 years, which is a beautiful whiskey. I'm certainly not saying it isn't, but what we are making isn't necessarily in vogue, kind of in the same way that my unfiltered Schwarz beer that I adored, guess how well that sold in Ann Arbor in 1999, so I guess we've always been a little bit foolish with some of our choices, and this is no exception.
Yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the other products that you offer and what's currently available?
Sure. Well, you had asked about scoops. We're about to release a new gin here in a couple of weeks to kind of celebrate that. The old man has been in the business for 25 years. So we're coming out with that we made with both red and green mandarins. Green mandarins, you're especially in Toronto, so many of the foods that you have up that way have green mandarin. Red mandarin is simply the same origin that's been allowed to go to maturity.
Okay.
And it makes it so that the flesh is very reddish and tastes more like a tangerine. Green mandarins, I don't have to explain to too many people. It's in so many cuisines around the world. We have that coming out. I mentioned the Dunder Pit. We've been playing around with that for a little over a year now, and put down what I call blender barrels. So in other words, the whiskey isn't particularly drinkable, or at least I don't think it is on its own. It's very high ester. But if you cut off 1 or 2% and add it to a bourbon or the 3-chamber or something like that, suddenly you're getting these beautiful little tropical notes. So we're probably another 5 years out from being able to start blending with that. I have a liqueur that's been aging in Calvados barrels for the last 2 years. A blood orange liqueur that I made by double distilling the blood orange. So in other words, put the blood orange peel in the still, distill it off, take that, distill it. And when I have enough, put it back in the still with more blood orange and distill it a second time.
Yeah.
That really brings the flavors up a couple notches and the aromas up by doing it that way. We make 4 different kinds of malt. So we've been working with breweries here in Colorado and around the country for little over a year here now. So I can list off some wonderful Oktoberfest beers that used our Pilsner malt just down the road. Yeah, we're always coming up with something. We made the first aperitivo in America since Prohibition. You always have to throw that in there.
Yeah.
The first American Fairnet, first American Maraschino, first American Amaro. So as you can see, the Maryland Rye. That's something that not too many people realize that was us. We were the first distillery to release a rye out of Maryland since the 1960s in that style. Obviously, we're in Colorado. And at the time that we came up with that, there weren't any distilleries in Maryland making ryes. And I did that with the idea of giving it a place to live on the menu, because to me, in my experience of tasting some of these vintage ryes, the Pennsylvania distillers tend to have a bit more rye in it. Of course, there are exceptions to this. Obviously, I was having fun. Tend to be a bit more spicy. And the Maryland distillates that I had tend to have an emphasis on that isobutyl acetate that I mentioned, and the floral notes and the kind of raspberry notes. So we came out with the Maryland Rye with the idea that if a Maryland distillery ever popped up, they'd make it the same way that we would. And of course, we don't have a marketing department to tell them this. And then finally, Maryland distilleries popped up and, of course, told me, buzz off, we're going to make whiskey the way that we want, which I think is punk rock and way cool, too. So,
yeah. Okay, so now that we've talked about what you offer, can you tell our listeners what the visitor experience is like at Leopold Brothers?
Well, it's a little bit different since COVID. So before we used to hold what we would call affectionately Gilligan tours that were 3 hours long.
Okay.
And very, very in depth. We took a lot of pride in our tours that they were educational. So you would walk out of there understanding the fundamentals of vodka, gin production, liqueur production, whiskey production. Because we make so many things, most cocktail bars that open up in Colorado, again, before COVID, would send their opening crew out to us to train them up, because it's a lot easier to understand all these things when you can dip your finger in a fermenter and taste it, or, here's what isolated juniper distillate tastes like, or, so that's the way that we used to handle it. Right now, we're just open. Our tasting room is open from 11 to 5 on Saturdays, and that's it. Okay. But before, we were doing long tours. With Delta coming in, I honestly, I think we're probably not going to open up until spring. We have such a small production staff here that if anybody gets it, they may be fine, and the stats tell you will be okay if you're vaccinated, obviously, but that doesn't mean that they don't have to sit at home for 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
And we can't afford that on the production side. So some people, may misunderstand and think we're being overly cautious, but we don't depend on our taste. We're 21 years in, and the tasting room revenue is nice, but we don't depend on it. What we depend on, if we lose 2 or 3 people, we got nobody to bottle, man. Yeah. So we're probably looking at spring before we maybe start tours again. And even then, I don't even know. My brother and I are getting older, and we're trying to do that work-life balance thing a little bit more. So I'm not sure if we're going to do tours again.
Yeah.
Okay. So earlier you told us about the Dunder Pit, and then when we weren't recording, you had mentioned that you're making your way into Canada, and if LCBO is listening, come on, let's get the whiskey here, please. But I'm greedy and I want more scoops. So is there anything else that you can share with us? I'm gonna go for it, because I'm not really lucky in this department, but I'm gonna go for it and ask if there's anything else. you can share with us that nobody knows.
And just remember, if you don't tell Renee, we're to get your mom on here and she'll tell
We're
us.
gonna
Don't tell. Your mom will tell.
It's worked for us in the past.
Well, let me think here. Maryland Rye, we kind of shut that down for a few years to hold on to it, and we'll be releasing that as a bottled and bond.
Okay.
I believe that'll happen next year.
Okay.
We're in the process of reconnecting. We lost our distribution from Brexit. Our distribution in the UK, they didn't like the uncertainty, and of course they've turned out to be correct in their thinking with Brexit. So we're reestablishing our exportation to the UK, the EU, Japan, Taiwan, and a few other places. I told you about the new gin. I told you about the blood orange liqueur.
Yep.
I mean, we do have other things, but I can't necessarily talk about that.
Okay.
I'm right about now.
It's just us.
I can give you one more.
Okay. We're
I
listening.
can give you one more. So we were just processing peaches. We've got 15,000 pounds of peaches here that I'm just about to pitch yeast on. And our plan is to put that in the 3-chamber.
Wow.
Okay.
There you
So if you can picture, what the rye is like with the 3-chamber, you think about what that's going to do to a peach. With obviously, or maybe not obviously, peaches are much higher in oil content than rye. So we thought, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, that we were the first distillery to distill peaches in a 3-chamber still, but my good friend had brought him up a couple times already. Alan Bishop came across a few Indiana distillers that were distilling peaches specifically in a 3-chamber still. So that's definitely a scoop, and I ordinarily wouldn't say this because, of course, this hasn't been done before, and I don't know if it's going to turn out right. It might wind up being floor sanitizer if I don't do my job correctly with it. So, but our hope, with that 15,000 pounds, believe it or not, it's kind of a trial balloon. We'll see how it reacts, see what flavors and aromas I get. We might make a cordial out of it. Some of it may go down into barrels. I just don't know until I taste it to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. That's cool.
What we know, it's never
That's
been
cool.
done before in Colorado, so we know that.
Yeah.
As far as I know, the Alan Bishop and I have gone back and forth on this, that we don't take ourselves seriously, but we try to respect the distillers that came before us as best as we can. And so we're very cautious about, I was the first, whatever. And we laugh at each other because we're like, well, we're kind of the only two people who would ever know this. But, we try to honor the past as much as we can. And so I'm always careful on that count. As far as I'm aware, yes, we'll be the only 3-chamber brand. No, I can say this. I have yet to find somebody who has come across a bottle of any kind of brandy that was distilled in the chamber still. And I'm very excited about this because I love eau de vies, and there really wasn't much of a market for it. I made it for my family. Every other year I'll do cherries or Bartlett Williams pear brandy. The yield is horrible and it's unbelievably expensive to make it. The yield should be a little bit better with the 3-chamber than you get out of a eau de vie still. So we'll see how it turns out. And it, I told my wife, if I do my job, I hope I do my job, this might be her favorite spirit, because the oiliness of it, it's going to be peach oil. And it should coat your mouth and coat your palate, so that you're sipping on it. Should make it ridiculously soft and delicious, and something you can just sip on with an ice cube. So cross your fingers that I don't screw it up.
I'll just go back to what your wife says. You're the first one in this decade to do it, so you got that going. Or the century.
That's right. I got my full 20 years of feeling cool. Right? Leave it to the missus to make sure that I'm, sorted. She was, of course, right.
So, Todd, as we wrap this up, just what does the future hold, both for Leopold Brothers and then you personally? You've talked a couple times about scaling back a little bit. So tell us what the future holds here.
Scaling back in the hours, 40 hours a week, and then travel. I hate flying, but I love traveling. But, I've told my wife that when I married her, my idea of a dream vacation it is to hop on a plane and during hockey season and travel through Canada and catch a game in Edmonton and Winnipeg. And Winnipeg's a beautiful city. I did a malting conference there 2 years ago. And of course, they laugh at my idea of coming back there to catch a game in February. They think I'm nuts, but German blood. I'm designed for cold. Look at me. Do I look like I hang out on beaches?
Listen, you might see Todd on his Canadian tour and me just in the background of every photo.
Right there, there's Renee photobombing each one. Yeah.
Just back there.
But lots of travel. My daughter is in an immersion school that where she speaks French.
Yep.
So plans for Paris and a few of these other places, and enjoy this. And we really have had global demand and for the 3-chamber rye in particular, and I look forward to getting that stuff dropped in these various cities and coming and tell people about what it's all about and the unique American whiskey. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The idea of 40 hours a week just talking about it makes me smile.
Yeah.
I think our fans want to know, and maybe they don't. Maybe it's just me personally wants to know: is the 3-chamber rye, is that going to be an everyday shelfie item? Is it going to be a yearly release? What's the future of that particular product line? Because it's so good.
Specifically,
we're planning on releasing it in quarterly batches.
Okay.
Each quarter will be a little something.
St. Louis gets a generous amount each time.
Yeah, of course.
St. Louis, Louisville,
Canada,
Kitchener area,
Kitchener, Waterloo.
Canada
area.
gets 3 bottles amongst us.
You're gonna understand how much I like Canada, and if sending more to Canada means I can go to Vancouver and Toronto, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
As long as we can sell it, that's the problem.
Oh, it'll sell.
It'll sell, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, it will sell.
So quarterly releases. The next one is going to be our holiday edition. The price point is going to be lower than the first one. The first one we were, we wanted to do something special to kind
you signed my bottle. Yeah,
that's
we're
exactly
gonna buy it. And
it.
it's signed. Your hand had to be ready to fall off. Yeah,
hand numbered bottles, and that was us doing a little something different. That's why we call it the collector's edition. So it's the very first one. But we'll do something different do a quarterly release is the basic plan for it. And hopefully it lasts a little bit longer than the collector's edition did. It seems to be stocked out at quite a few places, and it hasn't been on for that long, but we're hoping to get the price point down to make it a little bit more affordable. It's never going to be a $30 bottle. Some people have been disappointed, by that, but this was not an inexpensive process, to go through. Right. And a large distiller, you want a $30 bottle of 3-chamber, one of the big distillers is going to have to put their shoulder into it and really put an awful lot of it down. It's why they stopped using them.
Yeah.
And they switched over to the continuous stills. It's just not an economical way to produce whiskey. But I sure think it's delicious. But quarterly is the idea. So I'm hoping that over time it's actually going to show up on shelves. We'll see how that goes. It's as far as I can tell, it's a lot of behind glass, and then also some liquor stores don't even put them out, and
right.
Which I guess is a nice thing to reward the good customers, as long as it's not going to bots, and I know it is. In the secondary market, we can't control. I figure if Buffalo Trace can't figure that out, what chance do we have to control that? So
Todd, if you can figure out a 3-chamber still, you can figure out the secondary market.
Watch the next time we have Todd on. He's like, so I
figured out the secondary.
Figure out
how
a way to do it.
Combat the secondary market here, and I'm going to share that with everyone.
The closest I can think of are those porch pirate videos where it's a glitter bomb.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
I'm talking about.
Those are highly rewarding to watch.
I love those. I love those.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine who does that. And in America, I just don't. I don't have a gun. My parents do. I just don't understand. I look at that. There's only a matter of time before somebody is going to blow your head off. What are you thinking? It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it, because if it's from Amazon, these people will just contact Amazon, and Amazon literally gives you back your money. They don't like,
Right.
they don't,
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
even care. They don't want the police report. They're just like, oh, someone stole it. Here's your 40 bucks
Here you
back.
go.
It's
They're
not
making
money.
so much money they don't care.
True.
Yeah.
Just stop doing it, people. Stop stealing off people's porches.
Yeah.
So Todd, anything you want to share? People want to follow this journey, websites, social media, anything like that to help them learn more.
Friend me on Facebook.
Okay.
Because of the Facebook algorithms, our Facebook page doesn't really function as, or hasn't. Most people, when we're talking about business, unless you're, paying Mr. Zuckerberg, people see like 1/10 of your posts, I've learned.
Mhm.
So Instagram doesn't have that, I've learned. So we do some nice stuff on Instagram, and definitely do that for any new releases. And you're welcome to friend me. It's not like I'm Harlan Wheaton. You can just friend
You
me
mean you're
on
sociable.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure that didn't come out right. I'm sure he's a delight. He's just famous. That's the difference between Mr. Well, among other things.
So get in Todd's Facebook now while you still
That's
have the
right.
chance,
Yeah.
because there'll be a point when he's going to be a little bit more
He'll be traveling,
Yeah,
working
yeah.
a 40-hour week.
Oh,
He
yeah.
doesn't have time for Facebook.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
I think you can only get to 5,000 friends, and then that's
That's
when-
right.
Oh,
so-
something tells me though, mom's gonna come in and she'll put you in your place. So it'll be
That's right. That's right. Well, isn't that really one of the wonderful things about our industry?
Mhm.
I've seen Booker No, I've seen Harlan Wheatley, I've
Oh,
seen
yeah.
Chris Morris. They're all very accessible and wonderful people. And I think we all share the same vibe of, we can't believe that anybody cares about what I do for a living.
Yep.
So there's a sense of humility, and all of those people that I named are some of the best distillers in the world. And the fact that you can get them on a Zoom call, I think, is pretty righteous.
It is pretty cool.
It's
It's a
fun
great
time.
industry.
We've
a
always said
fun
this
time to be
is
in
the
the-
one industry that people will just literally, they may not know you, but if they know you're in need, they'll take your call to help you out. The
That's
sad
right.
part is if you're doing something that no one's done in 100 years, there's not a whole lot of people to call.
No. And I was on another podcast where I was talking about, speaking with Lance Winters, who's been around. He's been with St. George for 20 years, and then I guess it's still the same distillery, for 25 years, something like that. It never occurred to either of us to call anybody for help. Like, that wasn't our mindset, that we thought that would be rude. I don't know what we were necessarily thinking, but I remember reading about was it High West, and the original owner called, who was it that was at Four Roses, who revived Four? Was it Al Young?
Jim.
Jim,
Rutledge.
thank you. I'm so sorry. I was blanking on his name for a second. But he called him up.
Mhm.
And I would never do that. It would never occur to me. And I'm not saying that calling him is wrong, but it's not in our DNA. And then for the 3-chamber, absolutely. I had no one to go to. There was nobody to ask any questions. And so that part's, kind of a little bit extra rewarding. But of course, I did the same thing with the pot stills, and, our vodka column or eau de vie stills, for the most part. I didn't really have anybody to call on those either. But this one in particular, I think, who was it? Fred Minnick said that he was worried that when he heard that I was doing this, because I didn't have anybody to call. We've never worked with consultants. We've never done that, because to me, figuring it out yourself is the fun part.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, you're the only consultant to call.
Yeah, I am. I can tell you this at this point. I will say this: if anybody else wants to get into a 3-chamber distillation, they better get ready to cut a pretty big check that'll go to a favorite charity of mine, one way or the other. I may not necessarily take the money, but it's gonna, as my dad says, we do a lot of charity tours and that kind of thing where people will pay, if, in some cases, a couple $1,000s to have a private tour with us. To have me running my mouth go to something good is a pretty good way to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody's listening that's looking to get into this, you're gonna have to have a lot of capital anyway if you want to get into it, but be prepared. Yeah, that's one of my favorite local charities, that's for sure.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Well, Todd, it was an absolute joy to talk to you and find out more
Yeah.
what you got going on. And, and we know you've been very busy, not only with the everyday job and increased hours with COVID, and then of course, all the publicity you've been doing. So we appreciate you talking to us today.
That was my pleasure. It was absolutely a delight. And I'm sorry I took up 2 hours of looking at the clock here, 2 hours of your life. I warned you.
No,
this is great.
It flew
This is
by,
great.
and it's the kind of interview that we want to do. So we love documenting this stuff. It was great,
Well,
great chat with you.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right,
That was awesome.
That was great.